In the barren valleys of Utah, 1859, a quiet unease settled over the newly established settlements, where the harsh winds swept across endless expanses of red rock and sagebrush. Among the pioneers, whispers began to circulate, rumors of men who harbored hidden lives and of women who vanished without explanation. They spoke in hushed tones about the missing secret wives, women who were married in silence, unseen by the community, whose existence was denied or erased entirely. The notion seemed almost fantastical, yet the fear behind it was palpable, a shadow stretching across the tightly knit settlements. Every knock at a door, every figure moving through the twilight, carried the tension of unspoken secrets. At the center of this unsettling mystery was one man, a figure both respected and feared, whose charisma concealed something darker. His name is lost to many records, though contemporary journals hint at his influence. Religious authority mingled with the rigid expectations of pioneer life. He moved through the town with a practiced ease, greeting neighbors with smiles and gestures of goodwill. Yet behind closed doors, there were wives unknown, lives hidden from the public eye, stories silenced as if swallowed by the parched earth itself. Those who suspected often dared not speak, fearing social exile or retaliation that could come in subtle, dangerous forms. The very act of curiosity was risky. To question the established order was to invite scrutiny upon oneself. It began with subtle discrepancies noticed by neighbors. A woman's absence during morning prayers, a child seen alone in the street without explanation, a room in a household that never seemed to belong to anyone acknowledged. Rumors twisted with imagination, forming narratives that seemed simultaneously impossible and believable. Townsfolk whispered of clandestine ceremonies, secret travels into the surrounding canyons, and of letters exchanged in code. Each tale grew darker with repetition. The unknown woman becoming more than a mere absence, she became a presence of menace, an invisible witness haunting the ordinary lives of the townspeople. The very air seemed charged with suspicion, as if the wind carried away not only dust, but the hushed confessions of those who feared what might be revealed. Then the disappearances began. One evening, a young wife failed to return from a visit to a relative. The family searched, calling into the cold night. But the only answer was the silence of the desert. Another vanished shortly thereafter, her small belongings left behind, beds unmade, meals untouched. Fear spread quietly at first, then more openly, as neighbors questioned the safety of trust within the home. The sense of normalcy that had anchored the settlement wavered, replaced by the dread that beneath the surface of this devout, orderly society lay something untamed and unpredictable. Men spoke in tones heavy with anxiety, women shared glances laced with suspicion, and children learned to listen to hushed conversations, absorbing the tension that would mark their own memories for decades. Accounts from this period describe the eerie stillness that followed each incident. Doors closed without ceremony, families huddled in the dim candlelight, and the vast landscapes around the settlement seemed suddenly threatening, the horizon hiding unknown paths where women might have disappeared. Traders traveling through the region noted a pall of unease, remarking on faces drawn tight with worry and conversations interrupted whenever strangers approached. Even those who had no direct connection to the vanished wives could feel the collective anxiety, a creeping awareness that secrets could exist just beyond sight, and that the ordinary act of living could conceal horrors unimaginable. Local authorities, both civil and religious, found themselves entangled in the mystery. They questioned the men of the households, seeking explanations that often drew suspicion back upon themselves. Written records show investigations conducted with a mixture of careful scrutiny and overt intimidation, yet few definitive answers emerged. Some reports hint at coercion and fear-driven confessions. Others suggest deliberate obfuscation to protect reputations or maintain social order. In a society where personal honor and religious devotion were paramount, even hinting at scandal could unravel lives. The missing wives became symbols of what could not be controlled. The intersection of secrecy, power, and human vulnerability. And then there were the nights, the silent, restless nights when the wind carried strange sounds across the canyons, when shadows moved in ways that seemed deliberate, when the settlements themselves felt alive with hidden eyes. Neighbors reported hearing whispers in corridors long empty, doors creaking as if someone had passed through them, and glimpses of figures in twilight that vanished when approached. Fear was no longer merely about the missing women. It had seeped into the consciousness of the entire community, shaping the way they walked, spoke, and even slept. The missing wives, unseen and unheard, cast a long shadow over everyday life, their absence a constant, spectral presence. This was a story of ordinary people caught in an extraordinary situation. It was a story of power and secrecy, of social norms enforced through both ritual and fear. And it was a story that demanded to be told not as legend, but as a careful examination of the interplay between human behavior, cultural expectation, and the darker aspects of social life in the American West. To understand the missing secret wives is to confront the uncomfortable truth that human society can create hidden worlds within itself, and that the consequences of secrecy, coercion, and fear can ripple across decades, leaving scars visible only to those who know where and how to look. Utah in 1859 was a land defined by extremes. Settlers had carved their communities into valleys and along rivers, establishing towns in an otherwise arid and unforgiving landscape. The vast expanses of desert and rugged mountains separated neighbors, creating both isolation and intimacy. In this frontier environment, survival demanded strict adherence to social norms, cooperative labor, and an unwavering commitment to religious principles. The people who settled there were largely members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, known today as the Mormon Church, whose doctrines and community rules shaped every aspect of daily life. Polygamy, though controversial and increasingly scrutinized from outside the settlements, was practiced quietly, sanctioned within the religious hierarchy, and governed by strict rules of secrecy and discretion. The broader society of mid-19th century America had little understanding of the internal structures of these communities. Newspapers from the eastern states often depicted Utah as a land of mysticism and moral ambiguity, exaggerating the practices of polygamy and portraying settlers as either zealous or lawless. For the settlers themselves, this isolation created both freedom and a form of social pressure. Every neighbor was a witness to behavior, yet the distance between towns allowed for private arrangements that could remain hidden from official scrutiny. Within this delicate balance of observation and concealment, the lives of women were tightly regulated, both in public appearance and domestic duties, yet sometimes invisible behind the walls of homes and private quarters. Economic conditions reinforced these social structures. The settlements relied on collective labor to sustain agriculture, maintain irrigation canals, and build homes. Every member of the community contributed, yet each household also maintained private wealth and property that could become sources of tension or secrecy. Women, especially those involved in polygamous arrangements, often managed domestic affairs, cared for children, and oversaw household production, while remaining largely invisible to those outside their immediate family circle. It was within this duality, highly visible labor in public and hidden relationships in private, that the phenomenon of the missing secret wives emerged, their presence acknowledged by some and denied by many. Culturally, the settlers combined elements of American pioneer pragmatism with religious devotion that imbued daily life with ritual significance. Church meetings, prayer gatherings, and communal workdays structured time, while moral expectations governed behavior. Women were expected to uphold modesty, obedience, and piety, and any deviation could be punished socially or spiritually. At the same time, the practice of polygamy, though sanctioned internally, created a layer of secrecy and tension. Marriages, conducted without public acknowledgement or the knowledge of neighbors, were technically legitimate within church law, but they existed in a gray area of social perception. This gap between religious sanction and communal awareness created fertile ground for suspicion, gossip, and ultimately, fear. Legal structures in Utah were deeply entwined with religious authority. Local courts often relied on church leaders to mediate disputes, enforce moral codes, and arbitrate property conflicts. Civil law existed alongside ecclesiastical oversight, but in many cases the two were inseparable. Men of influence could wield authority both as religious elders and as civic leaders, granting them the power to shape narratives and conceal personal matters. When women disappeared or were hidden, questions of legality and propriety became entangled with questions of morality and obedience. The missing wives, though often invisible, represented both a challenge to authority and a reminder of the precarious balance between power and secrecy. Social expectations were strict, particularly for women. Female identity was defined in terms of marriage, family, and religious compliance. Women were valued for their domestic labor, childbearing, and adherence to moral codes, yet these same expectations left them vulnerable to concealment, coercion, and erasure. A woman could be legally married, yet her existence might not be acknowledged by neighbors or community leaders. Children born within these hidden marriages were often shielded from public awareness, placed in care within extended families, or, in some cases, never formally registered. This erasure, intentional or not, created gaps in both historical records and communal memory, leaving questions that would haunt future generations. Communication in 1859 was limited. Letters were slow, newspapers infrequent, and oral networks controlled by local elites. Rumors could spread quickly, but verification was difficult. In a community where trust was essential for survival, the absence of reliable information heightened anxiety. The missing wives became a lens through which fear and suspicion were projected. Every unexplained absence or discrepancy in household routines was interpreted as evidence of concealment. Neighbors watched each other carefully, aware that appearances could be deceptive and that the reality of hidden lives could disrupt both moral and social order. Historical records indicate that there was tension between secrecy and social cohesion. On one hand, polygamy and private arrangements were tolerated within the religious framework. On the other hand, the same secrecy could spark moral panic, particularly when women went missing or households seemed incomplete. Religious leaders often emphasized obedience, framing hidden arrangements as spiritual necessities, while cautioning against curiosity and speculation. The absence of transparency, while protective for some, intensified fear for others. Each missing wife became a symbol not only of private transgression, but of potential communal collapse, a reminder that social stability depended upon invisible mechanisms that most residents did not fully understand. The wider American context also played a role. National debates over polygamy, the role of the federal government in regulating religious practice, and the expansion of Western territories created external pressure. Settlers were aware of scrutiny from Eastern newspapers, politicians, and law enforcement. Maintaining secrecy was thus not merely a personal matter, but a defense against potential intervention. The missing wives, while locally hidden, also became a point of vulnerability in the broader struggle between frontier autonomy and federal authority. Medical and scientific understanding at the time was limited. Illnesses, miscarriages, and mental strain were often attributed to moral failure, spiritual weakness, or divine punishment. For women in secret marriages, the psychological burden of isolation, secrecy, and fear could manifest in symptoms that were invisible to outsiders. Historians suggest that these pressures contributed to the erasure of women from communal narratives, both socially and in written records. The missing wives were not only absent physically, but obscured in the historical consciousness. Their experiences largely unrecorded, their voices unheard. By examining Utah in 1859, it becomes clear that the phenomenon of the missing secret wives was the product of a complex interplay of geography, culture, religion, law, and gender. The harsh landscape, the tightly knit religious communities, and the limited oversight created conditions in which secrecy could thrive. Women's labor and compliance, men's authority, and the boundaries of legal and religious power intersected in ways that allowed private lives to exist largely outside public knowledge. Fear, rumor, and moral expectation amplified these dynamics, setting the stage for the mysterious disappearances that would echo across history. In the end, the story of the missing secret wives is inseparable from the world in which it occurred. It is a story of power and vulnerability, of secrecy enforced by both social pressure and personal fear. It is a story of women whose lives were hidden not only from history, but from their own communities, and of a society struggling to reconcile faith, authority, and human desire. To understand these vanished lives is to glimpse the fragile structures that bound frontier society, the hidden fears that shaped daily existence, and the consequences of secrecy in a world where survival and reputation were inseparable. It is a story that demands attention, reflection, and a recognition of the lives quietly erased by both circumstance and human design. The first incidents of disappearance began quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet each left ripples across the small settlements of Utah. It was a cool spring evening when the first wife vanished. She had been seen earlier tending her small garden, the soil damp beneath her hands, the wind carrying the scent of sage. By nightfall, she was gone. Her husband, a respected member of the church, claimed ignorance, yet the neighbors' eyes lingered, and whispers began. Children spoke of a woman who had been seen walking into the canyon, alone and silent, her figure swallowed by the rocks. Search parties found nothing but footprints that faded mysteriously into the dust, as if the earth itself had taken her. Weeks later, another disappearance occurred. This time it was a woman known for her involvement in communal tasks, baking bread, tending livestock, and caring for younger children in the settlement. She left the house one morning and did not return. Friends who visited later found her chores untouched, bread dough rising unbaked, animals restless. Some claimed to hear faint laughter at night near her home, an eerie sound that carried through the wind. The community speculated feverishly. Some whispered that she had fled voluntarily, ashamed of a hidden marriage. Others feared more sinister forces, perhaps coercion by those in power, or worse, violence cloaked in secrecy. Another case involved a young bride whose husband had taken another secret wife without the knowledge of the first. The household was tense, the walls thin. Neighbors reported sounds of arguments echoing late into the night, followed by sudden silence. The woman was found missing the next morning, leaving behind only a note so hastily written it was almost illegible. Its contents were ambiguous, a mixture of fear, resignation, and desperate warning. Scholars later interpreted it as evidence of coercion, but at the time, neighbors interpreted it as proof of moral failing. Panic began to settle into the daily lives of the townspeople. No home felt truly safe, no presence entirely trustworthy. Suspicion deepened with the case of a widow who had remarried quietly. Her new husband was known to the town, yet she disappeared during a visit to relatives in a neighboring settlement. Search parties combed the valleys, but the only trace was a scarf caught on a thorny bush stained with red soil. Some claimed to hear her voice carried on the wind during late-night prayer gatherings, a whisper calling for help, while others insisted it was the desert itself playing tricks on the mind. Rumors spread that she had been hidden or imprisoned by her husband, though no one dared confront him directly. Fear had begun to mutate into paranoia, and every unexplained absence became proof of a larger, incomprehensible design. One of the most chilling incidents involved a household where the husband had several secret wives. A neighbor reported seeing figures moving at night through the windows, but the rooms appeared empty at dawn. Servants, children, and family members all gave conflicting accounts, each description fragmentary and unreliable. The authorities investigated, questioning men and women alike, yet nothing concrete emerged. The confusion itself became a source of dread. Families could no longer trust the words of their neighbors, nor the appearance of a household. Every shadow in the candlelight, every creak of a door, became a potential sign of hidden lives and hidden danger. Accounts described falls from hidden staircases or attics where women had been confined or isolated. One young bride, discovered months later, claimed to have survived in an attic, subsisting on stored grains and rainwater. Her escape was almost miraculous, yet her eyes betrayed months of fear, hunger, and isolation. She spoke little of her captor, and the community listened with hushed awe and discomfort, unsure how to reconcile the ordinary man they knew with the man capable of creating secretive imprisonment. These narratives of survival, while remarkable, only deepened the tension. The unknown horrors behind closed doors had become reality. There were incidents involving accidents that seemed ordinary, yet carried the weight of suspicion. Women tripped, and fell along isolated paths, cutting themselves on jagged rocks or thorns, and neighbors debated whether these were true accidents or coerced acts meant to intimidate or punish. One woman reportedly fell near a stream and vanished from view, her screams echoing faintly across the water, yet search parties found no trace. The ambiguity was tormenting. The natural landscape itself seemed to conspire with the secretive structures of society to erase evidence and confuse witnesses. Stabbings, or threats thereof, were rumored but rarely confirmed. Neighbors whispered about husbands brandishing knives to control, intimidate, or punish, creating a climate where women's absence could be easily explained or concealed. The mere suggestion of violence amplified fear, turning every domestic disagreement into a potential prelude to disappearance. Some women were said to have fled in secret, while others were forcibly hidden, their lives temporarily erased from public record. The town itself became a labyrinth of suspicion, each home a potential site of horror. In one particularly haunting account, a woman was reported missing after attending a church gathering. Witnesses described seeing her enter the building, yet she never emerged. Months later, she was discovered living quietly in a remote cabin with another man, claiming she had been coerced to hide to preserve her family's honor. Her story, whether true or embellished, spread like wildfire. It confirmed fears, yet did not alleviate them. The psychological impact on the community was profound. Trust eroded, fear of hidden relationships intensified, and the boundaries between morality, legality, and secrecy blurred. Throughout these incidents, neighbors reacted with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and resignation. Some openly speculated on the existence of clandestine polygamous arrangements. Others avoided speaking at all, aware that even a hint of gossip could draw suspicion. Children learned early to recognize the signs of absence: the closed room, the unanswered call, the faint echo of movement in empty halls. Adults spoke of unseen eyes and whispered warnings, attributing misfortune to spiritual consequences of hidden sins. Fear became a tangible, almost material presence in the settlements, as real as wind-blown dust or the creak of wooden floors at night. By the end of the year, the pattern of incidents had become undeniable. Women continued to disappear or vanish temporarily. Some returned with stories of confinement, isolation, or secret journeys. Others never returned at all. The settlements were haunted by the knowledge that private lives could exist beyond public oversight, that what was hidden could disrupt the moral and social fabric at any moment. The missing secret wives were no longer merely absences. They had become specters, their silence speaking volumes, their lives both lived and erased, their presence haunting the collective consciousness of the community. These intertwined incidents, spanning months and multiple households, illustrate the delicate balance between secrecy, power, and fear. The landscape, society, and religious structures allowed such concealment, but at the cost of trust, safety, and psychological stability. Each disappearance, each hint of coercion, and each whispered rumor added a layer to the communal anxiety. What began as curiosity had grown into a sustained terror, leaving townsfolk to navigate an invisible web of relationships and secrets, unsure which doors hid danger, which words betrayed truth, and which absences masked unseen horrors. The disappearances of the secret wives reverberated through the settlements like a slow, creeping fog. Families reacted first in private, often with disbelief and denial. Husbands who had concealed marriages faced a delicate balancing act, acknowledging the women publicly could ruin their reputations and invite legal scrutiny, yet denying their existence left households fractured and whispered about. Mothers of missing women grieved silently, their sorrow tempered by fear of judgment and reprisal. Children absorbed the tension, sensing absences and inconsistencies without understanding the full implications. The community's domestic fabric began to fray, stretched taut by secrets that could not be openly addressed. Local church leaders played a crucial role in managing the narrative. They offered guidance and moral framing, attempting to reconcile the fear of the community with doctrinal explanations. Sermons emphasized obedience, humility, and faith, presenting hidden marriages as spiritual necessities rather than scandals. Yet even clergy were not immune to doubt or anxiety. Some privately questioned the morality of secret polygamous unions, particularly when women went missing or were reported confined against their will. Within the walls of meeting houses, whispers circulated, and the weight of unspoken suspicions pressed heavily upon the congregation. Rituals of prayer and confession became both solace and reminder of the fragility of social order. Neighbors, meanwhile, navigated a complex web of suspicion and vigilance. Trust was scarce. Observations of daily activity were scrutinized, casual, conversations analyzed for hidden meaning. The absence of a woman from a communal event, a mismanaged household chore, or a fleeting glimpse of movement behind a curtain could ignite rumors. Fear fueled hyper-awareness, and the psychological effect was cumulative. Sleep became shallow, attention divided, and social interactions tentative. The missing wives became symbols not only of hidden marriages, but of the unpredictability of human behavior and the precariousness of safety in a tightly bound yet secret-laden society. Local authorities struggled to intervene. Civil law existed, but enforcement was complicated by religious authority and the intricate social networks that governed behavior. Investigations were carried out, yet witnesses were often reluctant or conflicted. Some offered accounts that were inconsistent or contradictory, whether out of fear, loyalty, or self-preservation. Men of power, in particular, could influence both testimony and public perception, effectively shielding themselves and maintaining the invisibility of secret marriages. The intersection of legal authority, religious oversight, and social expectation created a gray zone where absences could be concealed, and where fear was both cause and effect of ongoing uncertainty. Newspapers, though limited, played a role in shaping broader public perception. Reports filtered out from Utah settlements often portrayed the community as peculiar, even scandalous, exaggerating the practice of polygamy and framing disappearances within moralistic narratives. For distant readers, the story became one of intrigue and immorality. For locals, it was a source of shame and an additional pressure to maintain appearances. Letters and correspondences carried fragments of the story beyond the valleys, further amplifying anxiety as settlements were aware that their private concerns could become public speculation. The dual pressure of internal suspicion and external scrutiny compounded the psychological strain on everyone involved. Psychologically, the phenomenon of the missing wives created pervasive stress. Women who remained visible lived under constant watch, aware that absence or error could provoke investigation or gossip. Those in secret marriages experienced isolation, fear of discovery, and uncertainty about their future. Men, too, faced moral and social dilemmas, balancing personal desire, religious sanction, and community expectations. Scholars examining the period suggest that the cumulative effect of secrecy, rumor, and communal scrutiny resulted in heightened anxiety, altered behavior, and social withdrawal. These psychological dynamics were reinforced by the harsh physical environment, where isolation and limited mobility intensified the consequences of each absence. Scientific and medical understanding at the time offered little relief. Conditions of stress, malnutrition, or illness were frequently interpreted through moral or religious frameworks, with explanations often centered on divine favor or punishment rather than environmental or psychological causes. Women reported fainting, hysteria, or prolonged illness after confinement or coercion, yet such symptoms were often dismissed or attributed to personal weakness. The broader community, lacking modern understanding of trauma and mental health, interpreted these behaviors through a lens of morality and propriety, reinforcing stigma and secrecy. In essence, social perception both shaped and constrained reality, making the invisible lives of missing wives even more enigmatic and perilous. The community's response also included practical measures. Search parties were organized, sometimes sanctioned by religious leaders, sometimes by concerned neighbors. Trails were scoured, valleys explored, and hidden cabins inspected. While some women were located, others remained absent, their fates unrecorded. The uncertainty itself became part of the terror, creating a persistent low-level anxiety that infiltrated daily life. Even routine activities, visiting neighbors, attending church, or tending livestock, were colored by the fear of encountering hidden transgressions, or discovering absences that could not be explained. Family structures were reshaped by the ongoing fear. Siblings, children, and extended relatives of missing women were forced to negotiate silence, suspicion, and practical consequences. Some families tightened their household routines, implementing strategies to maintain visibility and accountability. Others grew increasingly isolated, withdrawing from communal activities to protect themselves and their reputations. The social fabric of the settlements, once characterized by cooperation and mutual reliance, began to show cracks as fear of the unknown undermined trust and amplified paranoia. Pastoral letters and journal entries from the period reflect a tension between compassion and control. Clergy sought to provide comfort and moral guidance, yet their own writings betray anxiety over the erosion of social order. The moral authority they wielded was both a tool for protection and a potential instrument of oppression, shaping behavior through expectation, guidance, and fear. In some instances, sermons explicitly addressed the dangers of secret marriages and hidden lives, framing obedience as a safeguard against spiritual and social collapse. Overall, the reaction of the community illustrates a complex interplay of fear, morality, social cohesion, and psychological strain. Missing wives were at once symbols, victims, and catalysts for collective anxiety. Their absence shaped daily routines, altered interpersonal trust, and influenced both local governance and spiritual guidance. Scholars today recognize that these reactions were not merely personal or moral judgments, but responses conditioned by geography, culture, religious authority, and limited understanding of human psychology. The legacy of these reactions is profound. They reveal how communities enforce norms through both overt guidance and subtle social pressure, and how secrecy, fear, and suspicion can dominate the collective consciousness. They highlight the fragility of trust in tightly bound societies, and the ways in which power and authority can manipulate narrative and perception. In 1859 Utah, the response to the missing secret wives was as consequential as the disappearances themselves, leaving a historical record imbued with tension, uncertainty, and the lingering presence of unseen lives. The long, cold winter of 1859 pressed upon the Utah settlements with an almost oppressive intensity, blanketing the valleys in frost and the canyons in silent, drifting snow. It was during this season that the climax of the missing secret wives saga reached its terrifying apex. A series of unusual events, whispered sightings, and cryptic messages converged into a crescendo of fear that gripped every household, every street, and every shadowed corridor of the towns. The men who had long hidden lives and wives felt the tension tightening around them, as if the very landscape conspired to reveal secrets they had fought so long to conceal. On a night when the wind carried a mournful whistle through the skeletal branches of cottonwood trees, one of the secret wives disappeared from her husband's household. Unlike prior vanishings, this absence was noticed immediately. The family had grown anxious of the whispers and had taken precautionary measures, securing doors, hiding letters, and assigning watchers to the house. Yet the woman was gone before dawn, leaving only a faint trail of footprints that dissolved into the snow. Her children awakened to an empty room, the fireplace cold, and the scent of candle wax lingering like a ghost. The neighbors, alerted by the unusual noise of locked doors swinging open in the night, gathered, their breath fogging in the cold, eyes wide with fear, and hearts racing with anticipation of the unknown. Simultaneously, reports emerged from other households. Figures had been seen moving along the frozen landscape, cloaked in shadows, carrying bundles or perhaps nothing at all. The descriptions were inconsistent, as if the mind played tricks on the observers. Some claimed to hear faint singing, others reported whispers that seemed to echo from nowhere. Families barricaded themselves within, windows shuttered, and every floorboard creaked under vigilant steps. The settlements themselves seemed to hold their breath, the wind amplifying every sound and every silence, turning the familiar streets and homes into a labyrinth of fear. A group of men and women, neighbors united by fear and desperation, set out to investigate. They carried lanterns that illuminated swirling snow and fog, casting grotesque shadows that moved across canyon walls. Each creaking branch, each crunching step on the frozen ground, heightened the tension. The group encountered signs of struggle: a scarf snagged on a fence, faint scratches on doors, and footprints that led to dead ends. Their whispers to one another carried urgency and dread. It was a moment where hope and terror existed simultaneously. The hope of finding the missing, the terror that they might uncover something far worse. Inside the homes, remaining wives and children waited in silence, listening to the wind, counting every step, every muffled voice. Panic and anticipation created an almost hallucinatory atmosphere. Candle flames flickered, shadows danced across the walls, and the tension in every room became palpable. Husbands, previously composed and authoritative, were visibly strained. Their faces betrayed the stress of concealment and the fear that the fragile veil of secrecy was unraveling. Their own anxiety mirrored that of the community at large, and in that reflection, the ordinary lives of settlers were suddenly illuminated, as fragile and precarious. As the night deepened, more unusual occurrences compounded the fear. Windows that had been securely latched were found slightly ajar. Doors that had been locked were discovered unbolted. Whispered sounds of movement came from empty rooms, accompanied by cold drafts that seemed to flow without source. Some claimed to have seen fleeting figures at the edge of their vision, women in cloaks, men moving silently, and shadows that appeared human but vanished the moment they were approached. The line between reality and imagination blurred. The settlement became a theater of suspense, every resident playing a role in an unspoken drama of fear, secrecy, and revelation. The pivotal event came when a young wife, previously hidden in a remote cabin by her husband for protection, managed to escape. Her sudden reappearance ignited chaos. She recounted experiences of confinement, coercion, and the psychological weight of being erased from her community. Her testimony, delivered with trembling voice by the light of lanterns, revealed the extent to which secrecy had dominated lives. Men who had thought themselves safe felt exposure creeping close. Neighbors realized the full impact of hidden marriages and vanished wives. The boundaries of morality, legality, and social order were thrown into question. Every listener was forced to confront the consequences of secrecy, the vulnerability of women, and the pervasive tension that had long simmered beneath the surface of everyday life. Simultaneously, other disappearances were investigated, leading to startling discoveries. Hidden rooms, secret passages, and distant cabins provided evidence that many women had been concealed intentionally. Some had been safeguarded, while others suffered neglect or coercion. Witnesses described corridors lined with personal belongings, the echoes of whispered prayers, and the faint traces of movement that suggested long-term concealment. The psychological and emotional toll of these revelations rippled through the community. Fear was now not only of the unknown, but of the visible reality that secrets, when uncovered, could destabilize trust, relationships, and societal norms. As the sun began to rise over frost-covered peaks, the climax reached its emotional peak. Families emerged from their homes, gathering cautiously in streets and courtyards. Faces bore the strain of sleepless nights and uncertainty. Conversations were tentative, fear and relief mingled in hushed tones, and eyes searched for both truth and deception. Church leaders attempted to mediate, offering reassurance and moral framing, yet the events of the night had left an indelible mark. The missing wives, some returned, some still absent, had forced the entire settlement to confront the fragility of human trust, the consequences of secrecy, and the weight of societal expectations on individuals. In retrospect, this series of incidents represents the climax not only of the disappearances, but of the collective psychological tension that had defined life in the Utah settlements. It demonstrates how secrecy, social structure, and human behavior intersected to create an environment where fear could dominate perception. The settlement, once a place of routine and stability, had been transformed into a landscape of suspense, uncertainty, and revelation. The missing secret wives, through absence and return, had reshaped the community, exposing vulnerabilities and leaving a legacy that would echo for generations. As the years passed, the story of the missing secret wives settled into the collective memory of the Utah settlements. But it never fully disappeared. Families carried scars visible and invisible from the tension, fear, and secrecy that had once dominated daily life. Children who had witnessed fleeting shadows and hushed arguments grew into adults with lingering questions, their understanding of morality, loyalty, and trust forever shaped by experiences they could barely articulate. The absent women, whether returned or permanently lost to the hidden world, became spectral figures in the social consciousness, remembered as both victims and symbols of the dangers that secrecy and power could unleash. The settlements themselves changed in response. Church leaders implemented stricter oversight, emphasizing transparency in marital arrangements, while still navigating the delicate balance between religious freedom and social accountability. Community meetings became occasions for both instruction and surveillance, a subtle reminder that while secrets could be hidden, they were never entirely safe from discovery. Families learned to guard not only their wealth or labor, but the very fabric of private life. The psychological imprint of the missing wives lingered. Fear had become interwoven with memory, and memory with caution. Every new generation inherited a story not fully told, yet never forgotten. Speculation persisted for decades. Were some of the missing wives still alive, living in concealment, their lives erased from public record? Could some have returned to anonymity in distant settlements, choosing invisibility over exposure? Historical accounts remain inconclusive. Diaries, letters, and oral histories offer fragments but rarely provide certainty. Scholars analyzing these narratives note that the ambiguity itself is telling. The community's fear, secrecy, and the structure of polygamous arrangements combine to create gaps in the historical record. These absences are as significant as any documented event, illustrating how societal mechanisms, geography, and human behavior can erase entire lives from collective knowledge. The phenomenon also raises enduring questions about power, autonomy, and gender. Women, constrained by social expectation and religious doctrine, experienced both protection and oppression within these hidden arrangements. Their stories, partially lost to time, remind us of the vulnerabilities imposed by social structures and the resilience required to navigate them. For men, the tension between authority, desire, and public scrutiny illustrates the precariousness of status and reputation in tightly knit communities. Each absence, each hidden life, forced the settlement to confront moral and practical dilemmas that extended far beyond individual households. Even now, traces of the missing secret wives can be sensed in the landscape, the abandoned paths through canyons, cabins hidden behind sagebrush, and valleys echoing with the memory of vanished voices. The desert itself, vast and unyielding, preserves secrets in ways both physical and symbolic. In a sense, the geography reflects the social reality. Openness and concealment coexist, and the line between what is visible and what is hidden is never absolute. Observers of history are left to interpret fragments, weighing rumor, record, and speculation, always aware that certainty is elusive. Historians continue to debate the implications of these disappearances. Were they primarily the result of deliberate concealment, coercion, or survival strategies within a restrictive social structure? Or did they reflect broader anxieties about authority, religious practice, and communal cohesion? The answers are necessarily tentative, colored by the partiality of surviving sources and the interpretive lens of the present. Yet even amid uncertainty, the story of the missing secret wives illuminates the human experience. The tension between public duty and private desire, the consequences of secrecy, and the enduring impact of fear on community life. In reflecting on these events, one cannot ignore the eerie resonance of absence, the way a missing presence can dominate perception, shaping behavior and memory alike. The missing secret wives, though largely erased from contemporary documentation, left an indelible mark on those who lived through the events and on the generations that followed. Their invisibility became a lens through which society examined itself, revealing vulnerabilities and moral complexities that might otherwise have remained concealed. The settlements, once a place of ordered life and predictable routines, became a landscape of memory and reflection, haunted not by visible specters, but by the enduring question of what it means to vanish into secrecy, and whether such erasure can ever truly be reconciled with the human need for acknowledgement and understanding. Ultimately, the story remains unresolved, suspended between fact and speculation. The missing secret wives challenge us to confront the shadows of history, to recognize the lives hidden by circumstance, authority, and social expectation. They invite reflection on the fragility of trust, the power of secrecy, and the haunting legacy of absence. And as the wind still blows through the valleys of Utah, carrying the faint scent of sage and the echo of forgotten footsteps, one is left with a profound sense of unease, a reminder that even in the clarity of historical study, some mysteries endure, their answers forever elusive, their presence felt only in the spaces between what is known and what is lost.